Hey, welcome back to my video series on the LGBT Christian and Christian community. The first thing I wanted to say on this blog is not all Christians agree on Scripture and the law. This may shock some people, but no, it isn't open and shut as people once thought. And I guess the biggest verse for me in my own personal move over to affirming practice and belief was actually Acts 15:10. It's a verse in the early church that was talking about why we should include Gentiles or people groups into the early church. And this is what was said by Paul. Why are you putting God to the test by laying a burden on the Gentiles that even your fathers could not bear? I think this burden also applies to involuntary celibacy, and I think there's a little bit of an irony there because I guess sometimes when I'm really frustrated about this whole topic, I kind of wish the fathers of those who I disagreed with had kept up with such a burden. But some of you will get that on the way home, some of you just got that now. But anyway, I guess looking at the whole thing, I kind of wanted to structure it in the past, in the present, and in the future as far as life stages go. I guess I feel like some of the LGBT teens are forced to live like orphans when they're put out by their religious parents, or there's enmity placed between them and their parents. Because of ex-gay theology, who ironically pay for such abuse. Luckily, I have two loving parents, so this doesn't apply to me, but I do want to quote this other scripture. If anyone does not provide for his relatives, especially members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. And I feel like with teen homelessness, in large part due to LGBT concerns, that we need to be extremely careful about those who we cast out as orphans. And I don't think the church has really even said much on that issue. I guess also now in the present, I feel like a lot of LGBT are forced to live like widows in the church, or particularly the conservative church, and heavy burdens are laid on them as far as their lifestyle that aren't even placed on straight couples, and no finger is even lifted to help. Like, the church has been very marriage centric, which is a great thing. It's just what about those outside of marriage? And community hasn't built a place for such. And then in the future, like, the Bible makes a big deal about legacy. Like, what do I leave to those who come after me? And you see this theme throughout the Old Testament about legacy. And you also see, and I also feel that the LGBT brother is left without a legacy, which I felt much like Onan, who God killed as evil. So because there's no legacy that's maintained, I don't think God's in non-affirming practice. But when we start looking at these things, there are real human costs to non-affirming practice. And I guess I have to question, are you going to change or stand in the way of Christ? Stand in the way of Christ reaching people made in his own image, people who he pours out his Spirit into as well. But I think another thing is that God also teaches us to treat no people or no person as unclean. And Paul makes a huge deal out of like the goal of his instruction even says is a pure heart, a good conscience, and a sincere faith. And I feel like all of these are damaged in various ways, just by not accepting the LGBT brother. But I think there will come a day when the church will have to answer defensively, and the LGBT will not, on these 6 verses. In that day, I think the righteous will live by faith, and faith in the only Son of God. Unlike where they live by faith and it's prefaced by unless they are gay. So I guess in conclusion, Scripture says a lot of things, and these promises are open to all people, and I would like at one point for God's church to be a house of prayer for all peoples.